An excerpt on the fool's problem from chapter 15 of Hobbes' Leviathan, of other laws of nature. From that law of nature, by which we are obliged to transfer to another such rights as, being retained, hinder the peace of mankind, there follows a third law, which is this: that men perform their covenants made, without which covenants are in vain and but empty words. And the right of all men to all things remaining, we are still in the condition of war. And in this law of nature consists the fountain and original of justice. For where no covenant has preceded, there has no right been transferred, and every man has right to everything, and consequently no action can be unjust. But when a covenant is made, then to break it, it is unjust. And the definition of injustice is no other than the not performance of covenant. And whatsoever is not unjust is just. Okay, so in the next paragraph, Hobbes basically says that fear of non-performance on either side invalidates the covenant. The most important sentence is this: therefore, before the names of just and unjust can have place, there must be some coercive power that compel men equally to the performance of their covenants, by the terror of some punishment greater than the benefit they expect by the breach of their covenant. And the next paragraph finally addresses the fool. Okay. The fool has said in his heart, there is no such thing as justice, and sometimes also with his tongue, seriously alleging that every man's conservation and contentment being committed to his own care, there could be no reason why every man might not do what he thought conduced thereunto, and therefore also to make or not make, keep or not keep covenants was not against reason when it conduced to one's benefit. The fool does not deny that there are covenants, and that they are sometimes broken, sometimes kept. The fool does not deny that such breach of them may be called injustice, and the observance of them called justice. But the fool questions whether injustice, taking away the fear of God, for the same fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So the fool questions whether injustice may not sometimes stand with that reason which dictates to every man his own good, and particularly when injustice conduces to such a benefit as shall put a man in a condition to neglect not only the dispraise and revilings, but also the power of other men. The kingdom of God is gotten by violence, but what if it could be gotten by unjust violence? So I guess, can you get to the biblical heaven, to the paradise, through unjust violence? So were it against reason to so get it, when it is impossible to receive hurt by it? And if it be not against reason, it is not against justice, or else justice is not to be approved for good. From such reasoning as this, successful wickedness has obtained the name of virtue, and some that in all other things have disallowed the violation of faith, yet have allowed it when it is for the getting of a kingdom. And the heathen that believed that Saturn was deposed by his son Jupiter, believed nevertheless the same Jupiter to be the avenger of injustice, somewhat like to a piece of law in Coke's Commentaries on Littleton, where Coke says, if the right heir of the crown be attainted of treason, yet the crown shall descend to him, and instante the attainder be void. From which instances a man will be very prone to infer that when the heir apparent of a kingdom shall kill him that is in possession, though his father. So the heir of a kingdom kills the possessor of the kingdom. The prince kills his father, the king. You may call it injustice, or by what other name you will, yet it can never be against reason, seeing all voluntary actions of men tend to the benefit of themselves, and those actions are most reasonable that conduce most to their ends. This specious reasoning is nevertheless false. Okay. So why is this reasoning false? In the next several paragraphs, Hobbes explains. For the question is not of promises mutual, where there is no security of performance on either side. For such promises are no covenants. So we are not talking of a mutual promise where there is a fear of non-performance. So we are, the fool, the prince, we are in a commonwealth. And in a commonwealth, one party has already performed their side of the bargain, or there is a power to make him perform. So I suppose what Hobbes is driving at is that the prince or the fool is already in security. And so all other people around him continue day in and day out to perform their side of the bargain. So the fool looks around and he sees people who have in the past obeyed sovereign's commands and can be reasonably expected to continue to do so, because there is a power to make them perform. So again, Hobbes says, in case of a prince, the question is not of a mutual promise, but the question is whether it is against reason, so against fool's reason, or if you want, against fool's benefit, to perform his side of the bargain or not. So the other party has performed. Is it against my reason and my benefit now to hold up my end of the bargain? Let's go back to the text. Hobbes says, and I say it is not against reason. First, when a man does a thing which, notwithstanding anything that can be foreseen and reckoned on, tends to his own destruction, howsoever some accident which he could not expect arriving may turn it to his benefit. Yet such events do not make it reasonably or wisely done. So if I do something that tends to my destruction, but by accident it leads to my benefit, it was still a stupid thing to do. Secondly, in a condition of war where every man is enemy to every man, with no power to keep them all in awe, no one, absolutely no one, can hope by his own strength or wit to defend himself from destruction without the help of confederates, where every one expects the same defense by the confederation that anyone else does. And therefore he who declares he thinks it reason to deceive those that help him can in reason expect no other means of safety than what can be had from his own single power. He, therefore, that breaks his covenant and consequently declares that he thinks he may with reason do so, cannot be received into any society that unite themselves for peace and defense, but by the error of them that receive him, nor when he is received be retained in society, without men seeing the danger of their error, and this error of others around him, a man cannot reasonably reckon upon as the means of his security. And therefore, if he be left or cast out of society, he perishes. And if he lives in society, it is by the errors of other men, which he could not foresee nor reckon upon, and consequently against the reason of his preservation. And so all men that contribute not to his destruction forbear him only out of ignorance of what is good for themselves. So this is basically the fool's problem and Hobbes' solution to it. In the next several paragraphs, Hobbes provides some additional considerations. We should probably look at them as well. So let's continue. As for the instance of gaining the secure and perpetual felicity of heaven by any way, it is frivolous, there being but one way imaginable, and that is not breaking but keeping of covenant. So basically Hobbes says it is unimaginable that injustice could get you to heaven. Let's continue. And for the other instances of attaining sovereignty by rebellion, it is manifest that though the event follow, yet because it cannot reasonably be expected, but rather the contrary. So no rebellion can be reasonably expected to succeed, if you want. But even if it succeeds, let's continue, because by gaining it so, others are taught to gain the same in like manner. So therefore, the attempt thereof is against reason. So if you want, a successful rebellion teaches a bad example. So okay, you've succeeded this time, but you've set a horrible precedent, which may very well come to haunt you in the future. Back to Hobbes. Justice, therefore, that is to say keeping of covenant, is a rule of reason, by which we are forbidden to do anything destructive to our life, and consequently a law of nature. Okay, last consideration, last paragraph, Hobbes talks about religious fanatics. So, to the text. There be some that proceed further, and will not have the law of nature to be those rules which conduce to the preservation of man's life on earth, but to the attaining of an eternal felicity after death, to which they think the breach of covenant may conduce, and consequently be just and reasonable. Such are they that think it a work of merit to kill or depose or rebel against the sovereign power constituted over them by their own consent. But because there is no natural knowledge of men's estate after death, much less of the reward that is then to be given to a breach of faith, but only a belief grounded upon other men's sayings, that they know it supernaturally, or that they knew those that knew them, that knew others that knew it supernaturally. Therefore, breach of faith cannot be called a precept of reason or nature. And that's it. Definitely something to think about.